Today we're going to talk about the Soviet Union's plan to conquer Venus, the planet that, for centuries, humans imagined as Earth's twin. Covered in clouds, maybe hiding oceans, jungles, even life. By the mid-20th century, Venus was still a mystery, and the Soviets wanted to be the first to uncover it. What they found instead was hell. The Venera program began in 1961, in the same breathless decade that launched Yuri Gagarin and the space race itself. Venus seemed the obvious next target. The Soviets threw hardware at it. Venera 1 launched that February, weighing 643 kilograms. It never made it. Contact was lost after just 7 days. Venera 2 followed in 1965 and failed the same way. These early losses were disguised as Cosmos satellites, routine missions that masked what was really happening, expensive failures on the road to Venus. But then came Venera 3, launched in November 1965. It became the first human-made object to impact another planet, crashing into Venus in March 1966. Unfortunately, it too had gone silent before reaching the atmosphere. A milestone on paper, but useless in practice. The real breakthrough was Venera 4 in 1967. For 93 minutes, it transmitted atmospheric data as it plunged into the Venusian clouds. And here, the illusions about Venus ended. No oceans, no jungles. Instead, 95% carbon dioxide, pressures over 75 atmospheres, and a temperature that climbed towards 465 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt lead. Venera 4 was crushed before it touched the surface, but it revealed a truth more alien than anyone had expected. The Soviets pressed on. Venera 5 and 6 in 1969 parachuted down and transmitted for about 50 minutes each before the pressure destroyed them at 18 and 11 kilometers above the ground. Their instruments confirmed hurricane-force winds, over 100 meters per second. The dream of a habitable Venus was dead. So Moscow built bigger, tougher landers. Venera 7 in 1970 was the first probe designed to actually survive on the surface, a squat 1-ton capsule massively overbuilt. It crash-landed, toppled over, and transmitted only a faint signal. But from that faint signal came history. The first direct surface measurements of another planet. 465 degrees Celsius, 90 atmospheres. Venus was a pressure cooker. The probe lasted just 23 minutes. Still, the Soviets kept going. Venera 8 in 1972 carried more instruments, surviving 50 minutes and detecting potassium, uranium, and thorium in the rocks. By 1975, they escalated to Venera 9 and 10. Each mission weighed over 4 tons. They braked into orbit, dropped landers, and returned the first photographs from another planet's surface. Black and white panoramas of cracked basalt plains under a yellow-orange sky. Each probe lasted about an hour. Each also suffered the same humiliating glitch. Only one camera lens cap opened. Billions of rubles, and the cameras forgot to take the covers off. Venera 11 and 12 in 1978 repeated the pattern. Landers that survived up to 110 minutes, recording atmospheric chemistry, even lightning. But once again, both camera lens caps jammed. No photos. Finally, in 1981 and 1982, came Venera 13 and 14. These were the apex. Both carried drills, spectrometers, microphones, and seismometers. Venera 13 was built to last 32 minutes. It survived 127. It returned the first color panoramas from Venus, revealed volcanic basalt in the soil, and recorded the eerie rushing sound of Venusian winds. Venera 14 survived 57 minutes, but in a perfect metaphor for Soviet engineering, its soil sampler accidentally crushed and measured its own lens cap, instead of the planet's surface. It returned a few minutes of audio, the eerie rushing sound of Venusian winds. The last act came with Venera 15 and 16 in 1983. Radar orbiters that mapped 115 million square kilometers of Venus's northern hemisphere, at 1 to 2 kilometer resolution. The data was scientifically invaluable, but the glory days of the landers were over. In total, the Soviets launched over 24 Venera probes. 13 entered the atmosphere, 10 touched down. Survival times ranged from 23 minutes to just over 2 hours. The program cost billions of rubles. And what did they really get? A handful of photographs, some color panoramas, a few minutes of audio, and radar maps of a planet that annihilated everything they sent to it. But despite the failures, the Venera program still stands as one of the boldest experiments in the history of space exploration. These probes were built to die, but before they did, they showed humanity what Venus truly is: a crushing, burning wasteland. Today, 40 years later, every single photograph from the surface of Venus still comes from those doomed Soviet machines. For a brief hour at a time, they survived hell. They returned color panoramas, spectral readings, and audio, small, stubborn testaments against an environment designed to obliterate them. They taught us that Venus is not an Earth-like twin, but a planet transformed by runaway greenhouse and crushing pressure. The men and women who designed these instruments knew the odds. They worked at the edge of hardware limits and political expectations. Their probes measured chemistry, heat, and wind where no human could go. There was politics, pride, and occasional farce, lens caps and crushed samplers. But there was also hard data, maps that would later be mined by planetary scientists for decades to come. The Venera program set a foundation. It showed what survives and what perishes on Venus. Every modern design that talks about returning to Venus owes something to those battered Soviet capsules. In total, they launched over 24 probes. 13 entered the atmosphere, 10 touched down. Survival times ranged from 23 minutes to just over 2 hours. The program cost billions of rubles. And what did they really get? A handful of photographs, some color panoramas, a few minutes of audio, and radar maps of a planet that annihilated everything they sent to it. But despite the failures, the Venera program still stands as one of the boldest experiments in the history of space exploration. These probes were built to die, but before they did, they showed humanity what Venus truly is: a crushing, burning wasteland. For a brief hour at a time, they survived hell.